Hello, everyone. This is Meredith with a Y, and I am your host, Meredith Willits. Today, we are going to go deep, changing lives, and I am giving you the keys to the castle. And so we're here and we're discussing, and it's a hot day temperature-wise in the entire world in the news cycle, and we're coming in hot today. I mean, that's just the way that it is. And I really have left some really big topics up to you two. I'm really leaning into you two for a lot of your knowledge, your intelligence. You've been doing this for, a lot of episodes over on Dear White Women. And I hate to lean in on you, but you were kind enough and gracious enough to help us through this. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks so much for having us and for having these conversations.
Yeah. And I've said in many other episodes of this People of Color segment series that we're going to actually get to the really hard topics. And today I really wanted to discuss with you guys. I was at a dinner party. Someone says, well, how come Black people are allowed to say the N-word and what my white kid wants to sing that same rap and they shouldn't say it and yada, yada. And I was stymied. I didn't know how to respond to that. And you guys were nice enough to say that you would help me through that. So the floor is yours.
So I think with regard to the N-word, it's really important to understand the history of that word, to understand why it's never okay for someone who's not Black to use that word. So the word was first really coined to refer to the skin color of the slaves that were being brought from Africa to the United States for slave labor. And I think that when you have a word that starts from that level, right, that is already in a caste system, that is used to refer to a skin color, that is used to refer to a group of people that are basically being taken from their country and exploited for labor, there's already a history in that word, right? And then I think you look at how that word has been used throughout time. And I'm going to get to the use of Black people's use of this word in a second, because I think that is separate and should be discussed separately. But that word has never been used in this country in a way that hasn't been associated with hate, right, and violence. It is the word that white people would use to refer to their slaves. It was the word that white people would use in reference to lynchings. It is the word that white people use in reference to church bombings that killed girls, young girls. It's been that word throughout time. And it's been the word that is filled with such hate and violence that you can't separate the use of that word in, let's say, a rap song from that history of hatred if you're not a Black person. I think there's not a gray area here in use of the N-word, right? It is unacceptable because in using that word, even if you're singing along, you're still perpetuating that hate and violence, even unintentionally, right, with your use of that word. I think what is interesting, and Sarah, jump in, like if I'm getting this wrong, but because we talk about this in our upcoming book, but we talk about also how the N-word, when it was first pronounced, right, and first brought to this country, it has a hard ER at the end, and that hard ER is really that white pronunciation that is that hate-filled pronunciation too. The actual slaves that were brought here had a hard time using the ER ending because that was not common in their West African and African languages.
That sound, the
right,
ER
the
sound.
Sound, yeah.
Got
so
it.
They actually softened it to an A sound, like an open sound at the end. And you hear that in like Black vernacular too. You hear that in songs, you hear that, and that has been adopted. That was an adopted use of the term for slaves to refer to each other. So I think that people, use those words interchangeably. They're not interchangeable. And then that again, you still have that word being used by slaves to refer to each other, right? You're still in a position of servitude, one that you didn't choose. You're still, so even using that word with a softer sound doesn't make it any better if you're not Black, right? And I think that there are words in our language that we use, and we take back the power, and we change those words for the better. But if you're not being affected by those words, if that violence and those words aren't directed at you, you're not being able to change. You don't have that ability to take that word and change that meaning, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
no, that's so clear. That's so clear to me.
And I think the upshot of it is white people should never ever use that word, and also we shouldn't criticize other people or Black people for using it. And it is a very different example, because basically in the English language, there is no word that will shame a white person in the same way that this word can shame a Black person, right? So there's no equivalent that we can flip and use hurtfully. So all the more reason not to use it. But in terms of just a sort of example that might make it easier for people to understand, how many times have you been with a group of women who are like, hey, bitches, like, right? I mean, and you said we could swear, which is why I'm saying it.
Of course.
But if a man said that,
right.
Could you imagine? Like, really?
Right.
It would be like, no, you can't use that word. So that's sort of the relatable example for women that I want people to feel.
Yeah.
To understand why that's not okay.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of this for me started. Is I was in a group and someone of color said the N-word in a post, and but I didn't know their color. I really didn't. I just saw the N-word and I was like, it'd be so nice if in here we could not use the N-word. And then I was eviscerated because it was a person of color saying it. I didn't go that deep. And they're like, don't police the way I talk. I can say whatever I want, but I came from a very white place of saying we don't say that word as an umbrella kind of concept. I did need to do more research and go and see the profile maybe or whatever and see what they were referencing. But then I did I knew I should never say it. My kids should never say it. No one should ever say it. That is white. But then, like I said, it got tricky the other day when I didn't know how to say the argument. And basically the argument is when it comes up in a song, don't speak. And tell your kids that it's never okay, because it perpetuates this hate, anger, and violence. It's
Absolutely.
Perpetuating.
And I think what you just said is critical. We have to tell our kids this. Mm-hmm. I want to make it clear that kids are being called this in the public school system.
I mean,
and I think she was probably in 3rd grade at the time. We have these conversations in our home. My kids present as white, and my daughter, having already been prepared that this was like an unacceptable word, came home one day and said, hey, so-and-so was called the N-word at school today. And I was like, oh my gosh, tell me what happened. And she knew the significance of it and helped the child make sure that the teacher was aware of it. Like, it comes up. Kids are using this word.
Yeah. And I think what's really important as the mother of Black sons, right?
Right.
My husband knows the exact time, the first time that he was called the N-word, right? I know that my kids will be called the N-word, and I know that there's going to be that first time, right? And I'm hoping it's not from a white mom like other stories I've heard, but I know the power and the hatred that's going to be behind that word. So even if they're called it on, even if the intent of the speaker is not, to potentially be hurtful, although I have a hard time differentiating that word from anything that's not hurtful, right? Yeah. The impact will be devastating. And so I think, speaking as a mother, right, that is one of those moments that you want to protect your children from till the end of time. And I can't do it. And so I need everyone's help to help me protect my kids and kids who are like them, because those kids who were called the N-word in the 30s and the 40s, they ended up in lakes. They ended up on trees. This is not that far from our immediate history. And as we've seen in these past couple of years, it still is our current present. So I think that's where we need everyone to really understand this.
And for those of you that don't know the Dear White Women podcast, the origin, the crux of it is, hey, white people, especially white women, we really need to use your privilege to change the world. And here's 100 episodes how. Here's 100 episodes why. And here's my 2 brown sons, and here's my half Asian children. And I need you guys to do this for all of us, but for especially my kids, for especially my brown children who could have been one of those killed this morning.
I think when you are a mother of Black kids, and I think this goes for other oppressed people, right? You carry with you a list of the ways in which your kids could die. And every time you hear of another killing, you add that to the list, right? And I think that is hard for white parents perhaps to understand, because you don't walk around with those fears, right?
Nope.
It is just not something that you consider, right? But when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, right? I added like running in a neighborhood, Breonna Taylor being killed in your house, right?
Living in the wrong neighborhood,
bed.
being killed.
Right. George Floyd, like
Writing
suffocating, being killed on the street like an animal, right? And I think every time you hear these, you add those to that list of how your kids could die. And I think as parents, we all have those visceral fears, especially when our kids are so young, right? That like something happens and our kids are gone, taken from us. And I think that those fears, those are what we understand, right? And if you can comprehend that other parents are living that day after day, right? That can't be okay, because if we have children who are unsafe, right? No child is really safe. And I think we need to lean hard into that, right? Because fundamentally, we don't want our kids to be unsafe, any kid, right? But when my kid's safety is being threatened by what your kids may know or do, that's something that we can talk about and we need to talk about.
Yeah, because that kid at school that used the N-word, they learned it somewhere and it became okay. And it wasn't like, there was that conversation was not happening at the dinner table. And this is what I keep talking about in this series. And people might be sick of hearing it. And I know that it's really kind of a racist-y statement, but I don't have to worry about it. I don't think about it. I don't have to worry about it. It's not my problem because I have white skin. And that should never be the reason that it's okay for anyone to die or to just look the other way. And we talked about this in our pre-interview. If white women, and when I tell you I wake up and sleep to this sentence, I'm telling you, because I'm in it. If white women would start to love themselves more and not have that self-hatred and that, tearing each other up as white women, tearing up self when getting dressed in the morning, or just having that voice, it would literally change the world. It would literally change, because when I have anger and hatred and resentment living inside of me, that shit spews everywhere. It's in my kids, it's in my marriage, it's in my friendships, it's in my conversations, it's in the music I listen to, it's everywhere. It seeps into everything. And so this really starts with us. And women, as we just spoke about earlier, when we first started talking today, is we need to identify as women first and not white. Because so many of us go, well, I'm a white person. I'm friends with this guy over here who just stormed the Capitol. This is who I'm aligning myself with. And what we were just talking about is we need to start aligning ourselves with the women, period, of color, descent, religion, whatever, and say, you know what? Needs to be a sisterhood. It starts with us. It starts with us, all of us ladies.
And I realize as we say that, I'm a big fan of evaluating our communities more consciously, sort of looking at all your friend groups and making sure we're aware of who's in it and what gaps are we, aware of that we can build stronger relationships in for ourselves. The reality is for a lot of women, it does make sense to align with the partners that they're with. The way our society is structured, largely, there's church communities, there's your family communities, there's other places you belong, and sometimes it can feel really threatening to maybe stand up and say, I'm a woman first. But this is a very broad brush statement.
Yeah.
Women tend to be the relationship builders. That is sort of traditionally and largely a thing that women do well. There's a reason why, of the 3 different ways to process information in a healthy way, you can write about it or you can talk about it. And if you just sit there in your own silo and ruminate about it, it's not that great for you. But women tend to be really good at talking and having girlfriends and building community. Um, and it's up to us to start having those conversations, because we have so much power that we don't even realize we have.
Yeah.
And like you said just a little while ago, it's actually good for all of us to stop expecting perfection of ourselves and dehumanizing ourselves. We do need the sleep. We do need time to exercise. We do benefit from relationships. We don't have to just chase money and power at the expense of everything else, because you know what? That system is bad for all of us, but that's related to the system of dehumanizing everybody, people of color.
Win
Yeah,
lose. Yeah, and I think as we move into the feminine of women, I mean, I really do. I mean, we've been saying this for decades, that women are really the creators of education and community and change. And I know for a fact that the transformation that I've gone from, as I said in another podcast episode, was, I was at Kent State and I thought I was going to be a teacher for 5 minutes, and they made me do a lesson plan and use all these different ethnic names within the lesson plan. And I remember sitting there going, what a crock of shit. This is so stupid. Why can't I just use Jim and Jenny and Sue? Why do I have to use, these different names to work it into this multicultural? I was going to teach math, and you learn, you become. And I know that through my path, my husband has gotten better. My 4 children have gotten better. My friend group has gotten better. I'm able to articulate. So with one woman, I'm changing my little planet, my little kind of, area. And I think that, we don't always, my husband will a lot of times say, I don't understand that. And it's up to me, I don't know, to push it, I think, and we can all do that.
And I think we have this great moment right now, right? We are a year into this pandemic, and I think we've seen how women have been hit hard, right, across the board in so many ways, right? And leaving the workforce, and because we don't have help with childcare, because we don't have universal health care in the way that we need it, because we don't have elder care, right? A lot of those responsibilities go to women or the people who mother, right, in our society. And I think, wouldn't it be great, right, if we could align, because we know that as women, we all suffer, right, when we are not able to take advantage of things that benefit all of us. Wouldn't it be great if this could push us to get there, to align as all women? Because we know what's missing. We know what we need help with on a large scale. And we have that numerical majority number, right? Just slightly in the United States, but we do have it. So now we could really go and get things done, but we have to align as women first.
Yeah.
Well, and the other part of it too, what you said, Misasha, really triggered this thought, which is it's okay for us to be angry about it. We had a very fascinating conversation with Soraya Shamali of Rage Becomes Her. And in that book, I mean, the realization that we are usually, as women, as girls, socialized to not express anger. We are supposed to cry or be sad or express our frustration in other ways. But in order to adequately be able to express anger, and I'm not talking about flying off the handle, getting rage and shooting people up, right? That is an unhealthy expression, as we just witnessed in Atlanta. We're not supposed, that is not what I'm advocating. What I'm saying is we are allowed to stand in our truth and say something does not feel right for me and I need it to change. But in order to feel justified in expressing that anger, going back to your comment, Meredith, earlier about us needing to have self-love, what they found was that we can't objectify ourselves. If we are so used to being objectified and seeing ourselves through other people's eyes and gauging sort of before you step out and say that thing, well, how is that going to land? And how do I need to make sure it makes everybody else comfortable first? We're not going to do it. We need to be confident in ourselves and love our needs and boundaries hard. And then we can stand up for ourselves and everybody else with this sense of sort of righteous anger that, hello, the systems are not where they need to be to make this life possible. Our children need better. We need better. Our workers need better because we do live in an interconnected society. You know, you see even small things like the Texas storms then led to certain grocery stores not having produce. Like, we are very interconnected, and anybody who thinks otherwise, I hope you live in like a shelter and a bunker and you grow your own food and you are off the grid, because otherwise everything you're doing relies on other people. And it's time that we recognize that.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, as you're sitting there talking about that self-love, and I remember the night before my Dear White People episode came out, and I mean, there was not enough tequila to go around for me to get through to be able to sleep, because I was so nervous.
You were on fire there.
I know.
Just a little on fire. You guys bring the brains. I'll bring the crazy passion. But I was so nervous for putting myself out there, and all my thoughts and all my passion and anger and frustration. And, you know, there's been a couple, I mean, I've had conversations with family, close family and friends, and said, stop calling it the China virus. You cannot use that in my presence. Besides the fact that it's wrong, let's just start with that. But my daughter's one of her best friends is adopted from China, and this is causing violence against Asian Americans. And you, well, guys both know, you know, your parents, you have a parent that's Asian, and you understand the fear behind our leadership or anybody targeting by way of fear mongering and hate-based verbalization and language. It has a repercussion when we say the N-word, when we say the China virus, when we say these horribly angry, gross things. P.S. It starts inside. Just like you said, that starts in me. That means I hate myself somewhere, that I want to make someone feel just as shitty as I feel. And I want to bring them down so that I feel better. To me, that's the mental piece inside of this. And that's where I want all my white listeners and anyone else who's listening to understand, if that is living inside of you, that's living in you. That's just not a word. You're trying to bring down a culture. You're trying to bring down a people. And that's where we were at this morning with the shooting in Atlanta. That was someone that hated and learned to hate and learned that it was okay to hate. And here we are. It matters.
I think that internal external bridges is totally right on. You know, to this moment, we don't know that that person targeted Asian people. But the reality is they wound up killing 6 Asian women at their place of employment. And the impact, given especially the broader context of what you just mentioned with this hate towards Asian Americans increasing because of the virus, it's shocking. The impact of it, regardless of that person's intent, is very, very harmful. And what I find frustrating, I mean, Sasha, I know I've sort of jumped in here, but like, and I want to hear what you have to say. I feel like, you know, I'm the daughter of a Japanese mother. And through this whole virus, I have had moments where I'm like, I hope she's being safe. I think she's okay where she's living, going grocery shopping. I just want to make sure. It's just a tiny nugget of fear that I have and I've always carried through this virus. And now you see this kind of hate continuing to manifest in murder. And you see this sort of treatment that this person's already getting in the media with excuse making and mental health and all of this sort of stuff. And you're like, I'm sorry, mental health is absolutely an incredibly, you know, big concern in this country. We need to normalize that. We need to offer more support and have an outpouring of, you know, all sorts of programming and support for it. But there are a lot of people who have mental health challenges who do not go around killing people. Can we stop using that excuse to give a white man a pass?
Yeah.
Because I don't think the person of color who may have done something like this would ever be given that benefit of the doubt. It's inappropriate how we are holding this double standard up in the media, because I think that's how we wind up internalizing it. If we don't critically question every bit of news media that we take in, we sort of take it in hook, line, and sinker, and we go, oh, well, they maybe had a mental health problem.
I think, what I think about, and I'm going to take this back to my freshman year political science class for a second, because I know that's where we all want to go.
I didn't take that class. I don't know.
I took it.
The very sort of the first tenet that we learned about political science is when you want to distract from a domestic issue, you focus attention on a foreign threat, right? And I think we have seen how that works in our own country over the past several years, in particular during those past 4 years of the Trump administration, right? You can hide domestic problems by focusing on a foreign threat, even if that perceived foreign threat is in your own country, right? And I think that's what he did with terms like the China flu, right? But the repercussions of that are extreme. And so, like what Sara was saying about her fears for her Japanese mother, I have a Japanese father, and I have felt that same way throughout this pandemic, with regard to his safety, right? And now with the violence escalating, I feel somewhat similarly and concerned about my Japanese father that I do about my Black husband and sons. And I think that comes from the othering, right? We're so good at creating an other, right? A foreign threat, whether it's, a color threat, right, to whiteness, or it is a, nationality threat through, the term China virus. I think we have bought into that, right? And because it allows us to distract ourselves from our internal issues, right? And our domestic issues, but in this case, our internal issues as well. And so I think that there is real power in doing that. And it's that exact thing that we need to be very cognizant of when those terms come out, when we hear those things, because that's what it's trying to do. And that was very similar to what has happened in other countries in order to create, conflict that led to, that was sort of Hitler's Germany, right? Where the exact same political strategy was used. So I don't think we can be complacent about this, and how this is now playing out. Like, we have to draw the line.
Yeah.
What you just said reminded me also, you talked about the skin color and the nationality, but let's also not forget the power of religion. How many times has this country vilified, the Muslim faith? When have we looked at extreme Christianity in this country? Have we looked at, and so we need to look at white supremacy
or in history in general. Thousands of years of murder in Christianity, let's be clear.
Yeah, I mean, it's uncomfortable to look at, for sure. If you're in that population, it's really uncomfortable. But if we're gonna, I think the answer is to not group like religions without understanding that there are very many nuances within it, and not generalize based on a few extreme characteristics. And yet we need to be aware of the extreme characteristics that are very inherent in the religions that are predominant in the United States, the religion, I guess.
Yeah. And what you were talking about earlier, Sara, about the idea of being sensitive or being angry, I should say, and finding that anger and it being healthy or unhealthy and being able to gauge. I was actually just watching Jeffrey. He's on a TikToker, LGBTQ, and he talks about love. And he was talking about how the word sensitive is used on women. You're being too sensitive to kind of gaslight and make us feel stupid. But no one ever says anything about being sensitive and then having an anger reaction. Because any emotion, be it negative or crazy or sad, we need to understand that emotions, and that we need to kind of dial it back and let people have healthy emotions and not gaslight them by calling them, you're being too emotional, you're being too sensitive. No, I'm having a healthy reaction to my friends' kids being targeted. I'm getting angry that you keep saying these horrible things like the China virus or the Nword or whatever the hell else it is. I'm mad about it and I'm not being sensitive. So stop trying to quiet me. And that's something that we need to look. we're not going to be quiet. We're going to be sensitive because people get killed when we're not sensitive. People die. George Floyd threw me into a tailspin that I've yet to be able to get. When I even think about what he was saying when he was on the ground, I've yet to remove myself from that.
But here's the question. How many white people can feel that level of empathy for someone who looks different than them?
I don't know if anybody. I mean, I don't. What struck, I think, white women in that moment was the word mom. Had he not called for his, I can't. Had he not called for his mother, there would not be the solidarity that we saw in the marches, in the streets, in this past year. I don't think it would have been as powerful as it became. The solidarity came, and maybe this is the answer that we've been looking for, was the word mom. I think it shattered a lot of white women. I think it did.
I think about like mothering, and I was, holding my second son, right? I have two boys, when Tamir Rice was killed, right? 12 years old, killed carrying, not a weapon, right? And I think that when my kids ask if they can carry their Nerf guns around our neighborhood, my answer is always no, because, and I would like white moms, right, to think like, do you think twice about your kids carrying like anything around the neighborhood, right? Running around with their friends. But I am definitely not going to let my kids do that, right? Because you don't know what neighbor is going to think what, right? Trayvon Martin was killed when I was pregnant with my first son, right? By some neighborhood vigilante who decided to take matters into his own hands. And I think that, again, it goes back to what as a mother, right, you have fears for your kids. And if that moment for George Floyd, right, really was a visceral reaction for white women, which I hope it was for everyone, right, then that is what we have to keep remembering, right? I think it's easy to sort of slide into what works, we're busy, right? Like what is our realities. But I think it's very important to recognize that there are so many realities out there, right? And the reality is, for me, my kids are not going to be walking around with their Nerf guns this summer, or water guns or anything that remotely looks like a weapon, because my older son is getting to that point where he's no longer cute, right? He is going into the threatening level, because if you're a black kid, right, a black boy, you go from cute to threatening. There is no like,
handsome,
good looking adolescent, right? You're not in that. You're a threat. And so and he's this kid who smiles at everyone. He wants everyone to love him. He loves everyone. He wants to save animals, right? He thinks that, we need to think about what fish we eat, which is what he was telling me yesterday about sustainable fishing. But, this is the kid that people will see on the street and be like, he's tall for his age. Like, how old is he really? What is he doing in this predominantly white neighborhood?
How do we undo that? How do we undo it? I thought about my first night at Kent State. My mom dropped me off a night before. My roommate was there, so I was alone. And three big black, probably football players, because they always go there early, walked down the hall. And last night I was laying in bed trying to like dissect it. Like, if they were three big white football players, would I have been equally as nervous? And I scaled it down to, I was probably a 9 scared because they were big, 3 of them black, and I was by myself. And I probably could have got it down to like a 6.5 had they been white, just because I was alone by myself, a woman, they're large, etc. How do we undo? I mean, like I keep saying in these podcasts, is we need to unlearn all the crap that we've been, piled on with TV and movies and our parents and our church and our school and our friends and, media and, a 30 straight minutes every night of black people on the news destroying the city because clearly they're the only ones doing anything wrong. Like, that is really training my white brain and my listeners' white brains to think that only black people do bad things. And that's why it's not disproportionate that they are in jail. They are as proportionate as it should be, because they're the only ones that do bad things, because that's what they show me on the news. That's what's on the radio.
You're totally right. And I think in terms of because it's misrepresentation, they've done so many different studies that talk about how in the news and in the TV and in the movies, Black families are disproportionately painted as poor compared to white families. And there are also a disproportionate linkage to criminality compared to white families. Like the white families are underrepresented compared to the population and the actual facts, and vice versa. And I think, there's no like 10-point program to undo this. If we had figured that out, that would be fantastic. But that's why I always say this is more of an art than a science, but there are some fundamental things that need to be done. One is those practical little things that you can do. Like, let's start with practical steps, because sometimes you fake it till you make it, right? Talk to your kids about the N-word. Smile at the Black person and recognize them in the store. See them, don't unsee them. These little things that, Misasha and I often talk about that you can do. Have these conversations, critically analyze the TV shows that you're watching. Like, start doing the little things. Then I think it's important to learn about the history because and the structures that are in place. Like, do a little self-education. Read the books, watch the TV shows, watch the incredible amount of resources that are out there to just learn, because to be honest, it's not taught equally in the school systems. I think we've dug up stats that show that slavery was mentioned like over 100 times in the Massachusetts textbooks and like 3 times if you grew up in Louisiana. There's a huge disparity of information out there. So we need to put it on ourselves to look for the facts. And if anybody needs resources, us, like there's a ton out there. We can point you in the right direction. I think a third part of it is humanize Black people. There's such good platforms out there to just see Black people, Asian people, like, like that whole segment in People magazine or wherever, it's like celebrities, they're just like us. You know what? Black people, they're just like us. Asian people, they're just like us. Like we have to remember that humanity. We are, like Misasha, you just said about your son who's interested in sustainable fishing. Like, catch yourself when you're othering a person, when you have this judgment based on their appearance or what you know about the group that they belong in. Like that applies across the board, because I think we have to remember our commonalities in order to get over the othering. And that's a practice and a discipline that it's a perpetual practice.
Yeah. I think also, Sarah, to your last point about seeing people, as people, right? I think that, we just came out of Black History Month, right? And during Black History Month, there was an incredible number of television commercials that featured Black families doing normal things, right? And my son noticed that, and he's like, do you think there'll be this many Black people or people who look like us in commercials once Black History Month is over? And I was like, honestly, no, I don't think so. But I think, we have relegated sort of Black history to a month, right? When Black history is US history, right? Black history, Latino history is US history, right? Asian history, Asian American history is US history. And I think that in those months, we focus on civil rights leaders, right? And people who sort of have done amazing things, which is great. But if your kids, and in particular white kids, right, are just reading about civil rights leaders, they're never going to see the kid down the street as someone besides, perhaps the color, right, of their skin. I think that in our house, it's really important for our kids to have books with protagonists that look like them, and to be very intentional about the books and the media that you choose to have your family watch, and watch it together. There are shows out there with Black families doing normal family things, right? But a lot of times, and Sarah knows about my reality TV show thing, but I think that we have bought into things like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, right, which show white bachelors, white bachelorettes. And if you've got, one Black bachelor, one Black bachelorette in the 25 years of, this show's history, which seems impossible that they couldn't find any single like Black people along the way, or anyone else for that matter, they're the troublemakers, right? But we have these shows that people buy into and watch and follow and are passionate about, which continue to perpetuate these stereotypes that we see in society. So it's important to really be intentional about how you're consuming media, and it comes in all forms. You know, I think that when I'm thinking about my kids and who and the books that they read, right? Sarah, do you remember that when we were talking to Alvin Irby, I think he was saying that it's easier to get a book published that has animals as the main character than to have it be a protagonist who's not white,
Wow.
right? For children's books. So I think that we buy more of the books of non-white protagonists, they'll sell more, they'll publish more books with non-white protagonists, right?
Vote with your dollar. Yeah. Vote with your dollar.
And those are who you want your kids to see. All races, all religions, right? All, you know, transgender, disability. You want your kids to be exposed as early as possible, and then you're learning along with them. So I think that it can't be understated, that part.
I wish I had the stats, because going back to our earlier conversation about how we as women can band together and make change, I'm sure you can dig this up, but I think women control the majority of the spending in this country. I just can't remember the exact number that it was.
Yeah.
Where are we putting our family's money? Where are we putting our money? Can we more intentionally deal with, like we always joke, I mean, yes, I'm on Amazon Prime. It is very convenient to get things like in 2-day delivery. But if that thing is not urgent, can I go support a independent store owned by a Black person, a woman, Latina? You know, like there's so many different ways that our money can go further if we don't just do the easy thing. And I'm not saying that anti-racism or feminism or womanism or any of this stuff has to be hard. It doesn't have to be this extra layer. It's just changing your behavior patterns of what you were already going to do anyway, and making choices more intentionally. If you were going to buy a book for your child anyway, why not buy the book that features a different character? If you were going to buy a candle as a housewarming present for someone anyway, why not buy it from a store owner that's not Target, you know?
Yeah. And it's so interesting because you were just talking about normalizing the other. And for myself, I know this is going to sound really stupid, and I'm okay. I never thought that an Asian person was like another race. And this sounds nuts until I was watching The Real Housewives of Dallas, and they have an Asian gal on, and she was talking about how she was treated poorly by kids when she was younger, making fun of her features. And I was like, you can make fun. Oh, that's interesting. Like, I really never saw Asians as other. Okay. So that was compartmentalized as being alike. You are like me. We have the same color skin. You are very similar. You have smooth hair. So do I, or at least I used to. And so someone's only an other if that's how it's presented to them. You know what I mean? Like, you have to learn that, like, that person's not a part of your system, in my opinion. Like, my kids go to a school, there's Asians, there's South Asians, you know, from India. They don't even see that as other. So it's very normal to them to hear the different names and the cultures and the foods and the this is and that's. But I love what you're saying when you're like, make the other person normalized. Watch television shows with different characters, or read books with different characters. Like you said, that the lead is, you know, a person of color, or, you know, like you said, in a wheelchair or whatnot. I think that is huge, is to normalize it to not only your kids, but to yourself, to make it less taboo, less scary, less over there, is huge.
You know, with that, I think that's great to have sort of that lens of, you know, let's see what the other's experience is. But I think you touched on something really critical there about how Asian people are often seen as this, like, it's one of the most dangerous and harmful myths about Asians, the model minority. Oh, they're just like us. I mean, that basically upholds the system of, well,
Yep.
They're okay then. That means white people and people
Right.
who are like us are great.
Yep.
You know, and I think what it misses is the very real identity struggles that a lot of Asian people still have to go through. There's like so many different nuances of Asia. Asia is not a monolith. There are like over 15 major countries, right? All of whom have their own languages, their food, their cultures, their traditions. And if we don't dig into that and understand all of those nuances and think about their own questions of like, okay, the white people include me, but do they see that I'm looking different? Do they understand that I have a different cultural pull,
I'm
one of the
unique.
things, right, we're also always asked, I mean, I wonder this because as a half Japanese person, I'm often asked, well, do you speak Japanese? Right. And I do.
Mhm.
Say someone shows up who looks at white and they're like, oh, I'm part German and part whatever. Are they ever asked, do you speak German?
Never.
Right. Like, so there is still, even in those subtle things,
Yeah.
a difference between people of European descent and basically the rest of the world, white people versus the rest of the world. You're assumed to have some sort of tie to your culture. Even if you're like a third generation Asian person, people often ask that. And you have this conflict. I think a lot of people I speak to, at least, I'm not speaking for everyone, but have this conflict of, I look this way. Should I have learned that language? I feel bad that I didn't teach my kids Japanese. I'm like, oh my gosh, what disservice did I do? It's it's a weight, but I don't think white people consider their heritage with the same level of pressure or expectation because it's not placed on them.
Well, and I see, with the adoption, of children, Asian children into white families, and I I've only heard, clearly I cannot speak on it, but I've only heard that they do, or have felt like they missed out because they were never introduced to their language, the country that they came from, be it China or Japan or Thailand or whatever. And, when they looked up from the table at dinner, everyone sitting there staring at them was white. And so they went into the world mentally, physically, emotionally as a white person. That's how they saw their world. But then when they looked in the mirror, they have described that they're like, who the heck are you? Where did you come from? And so now, at the 11th hour of life here, they're like, I really want to know who I am. I want to know my heritage. I want to know about my culture. So I'm sure there's both sides of this conversation. I mean, there's so many, like you said, so many nuances, but I think we need to individualize people a whole lot more. We just keep, wide brush stroking, like, oh, I look like an Asian person, they're okay. Oh, I don't look like that person, they're not okay. And like you said, it's just too much. We need to go back. People are people, and mothers are mothers, and women are women, and we need to make this world better. Period. No, I mean, it should never be okay, any of my listeners, that you not anymore from here on out hear these stories and, well, it's not me. It's not my kid. Because one of these days it could be. It's we got to wake up. How anyone can sit there and listen to the stories on the news and not anymore have pause that it's okay that some other woman's child or some other mother or father suffers because of systemic racism and bigotry and misogyny. It's not okay. We have got to learn more and do better. We've got to.
I think yes, and yes. And one of the problems or challenges I see that would benefit us all is, there's this study that shows that the biggest predictor of people's willingness to help or not help other people is the time pressure that we're under. And often the excuse or the reason, I guess, that we hear people say is, well, I'm too busy. And what if instead of, and to some degree, sure, with the increased inequity of income, there are more people who have to do more in order to make enough money to put food on the plate and a roof over their head. But for those who are not quite in that survival, and a lot of white people, if you're going to look at the general population, it's generally speaking more white people who are not in that struggle as much in this country. What if instead of pursuing money affluence, once we have a certain level that we're comfortable with, we start pursuing time affluence? It's something that I feel is so important to us as a human species, to be able to slow down and look at and have a conversation with our children, have a conversation with our spouse, remember to reach out to the friends who are having a hard time during COVID, because not everybody was affected equally by it. And what would that do to us as a society if we were able to prioritize creating more time, breathing space in our schedule to take care of ourselves? I mean, how nice would it be to take a bath once a week, or feel like we could, like not feel like we are holding our breaths from the time we wake up to the moment our heads hit the pillow again?
Such
And
stress.
if we do that, well, then we can take time to actually think, reflect, and feel for another person as well. And I think those systems are really interconnected. And so when we talk about what's in it for us, I think if people want to make change, part of creating change could be slow down a little bit. Really, like if you have enough, think about what is really your priority in life, because those are all choices. After survival, anything else is a choice.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to thank both of you ladies for coming on Meredith with a Y. And I want everyone to head over to Dear White Woman, WOMEN, Dear White Women, I can say this.com. They've got tons of information. All their podcasts are on there. And this is me, Sasha, Suzuki Graham, and Sarah Blanchard, Dear White Women, the award-winning podcasters. Thank you, ladies, so much for breaking it down with such great, plain speaking. This is the way to change everything, or at least change our lives today, to move the needle. I really appreciate both of you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to connect on a more personal level, head over to meredithwillits.com or on Instagram at Meredith with a Y for behind-the-scene footage and outtakes. Please subscribe and come back each week for more Meredith with a Y. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.